So, naval history is a quiet life, and I never go after contentious topics. So that's why I'm doing the Galaxy class. But in a line which those of you who've probably watched the 12-minute video will have heard, but I'm going to say it anyway. To describe the Galaxy class as having a complicated history and being complicated ships is to suggest that the Roman Empire is straightforward. This is one of the joys when you apply naval history sort of style reference and phrasing and structure to science fiction. Because there is canon, which usually is referred to as, if you're looking in terms of websites, memory alpha. There is non-canon, but close to it, memory beta. And then there is memory gamma, which is, how do I put this? A sort of amalgamation of the two with usually some pretty decent ideas put in there as well. Honestly, it's going to sound strange. I realize alpha is probably more accurate, but gamma tends to speak to me more. And then there's the fact that I have books like this because I am a geek. And they have their own version of that. So why do I want to look at the Galaxy class? Well, they are a very interesting type of cruiser. And I think one of the troubles that comes when we're looking at Star Trek and we're looking at the Federation is we forget the phrase exploration cruiser. That's what they are. They're explorer vessels. So you have to sort of look back at the Age of Sail, where ships would lose half their weapons to have enough volume in order to do the exploration work. They would be fitted up with special science facilities, laboratories, all sorts of things, taking up space which could have been used for guns and crew in order to do their job. Once you realise something which is the title exploration in its name is probably going to be fairly big if it's still going to be able to do the cruiser role as well, because it's going to need a certain amount of firepower and capabilities for the cruiser role. Then it's going to need capabilities for the exploration role, and then it's going to need things like, well, boats, shuttlecraft, in order to go off and do some of the investigations. It's actually probably going to need a large a number of civilian crew and specialists, because honestly, why would even your very interesting in terms of or in terms of naval culture Starfleet want to employ some of those specialisms in their ranks? It's probably not sensible to. You can't give them what? Yes, we've got the science team. Yes, you do need a certain number of science officers. But you don't need the really in-depth specialist. The science officer needs to be very knowledgeable about a lot of things. They need to be incredibly good at science, but a lot of space science. You don't need someone who's an in-depth specialist on one particular area of science as your science officer. But you do need those people for doing exploration on an interstellar, or in the case of the Galaxy class, I would argue, they're the ones fitted up with the potential for intergalactic, although it would take them an awfully long time. Discovery. Canada trip. Yeah, it's a couple of weeks away. And I'm still doing a whole lot of paperwork and sorting everything out for it. Well, no, it's mostly sorted out. The dinner with fans sorted out, and we've got all these other free evenings. So if you want to meet up with us, you're more than welcome to. There is a Discord. There is a chat set up in the Discord, which is a. If you go to the link below, you'll find something which says Canada trip. In there are, so you can find Stafford and Wayne, who are arranging the Saturday dinner. We have currently nothing arranged for Halifax, but we are looking forward to meeting people. and that is one of the things me and Drac both enjoy doing. We enjoy meeting people when we wander around. Right, so let's get into what we need to talk about: the galaxy of the 24th century. Okay, so Jean-Luc Picard has this lovely line. A lot's changed in 300 years. People are no longer obsessed with accumulation of things. We have eliminated hunger, want, and the need for possessions. We have grown out of our infancy. What a load of twaddle. Benjamin Sisko has a baseball that sits on his desk. Picard has all sorts of little things, knickknacks, possessions, mementos, possessions. You have grown out of the need to worry about food because of replicator technology. That's good. You have grown out of the need to pursue probably some of your baser urges thanks to holodeck technology. Whoopie doodah. Now you're doing it versus electrons rather than human beings. Wonderful. You have probably evolved beyond many of those issues, but I guarantee you still have people who are greedy, not just the Ferengi. You still have people who like to have things which they remember, and people, that's part of human nature. We accumulate stuff. I have a huge pile of books behind me. I also have a huge pile of dog biscuits. Mainly because the fluffy research assistant is sitting down there going, biscuit. It gets even more interesting when you consider how small this area of the galaxy is in relation to this. The Federation is in the middle there. It does make it interesting when you consider some weeks the Enterprise was against the Romulans, was dealing with the Romulans, some weeks the Klingons, some weeks the Cardassians. Basically, your ship is doing the entire time doing a triangle route in your space, which is just, well, it's a waste of time, honestly. But it does give you again the point that, hang on, these aren't the regular ships. Because if you have an area of space which you are protecting, which is that large, which has that many planets and colonies in it, you can't really afford, and I say this from a loving place, you can't really afford to do everything with a Galaxy class vessel. You need more Galaxy class vessels than the Starfleet originally wants to build, but you can't afford to do everything with a Galaxy class vessel. You do need smaller ships. About 100 years prior to the time we're talking about, because we're focusing in on the 24th century, so the 2300s, Federation is described as its territory had expanded across 1,000 planets. Because of the cosmopolitan nature of the United Federation of Planets, its territory included at least 150 member worlds, spanning across 8,000 light years of interstellar space, with thousands of colonies and outposts, vast expanses of uninhabited space, and even planets inhabited by pre-warp civilizations directly incorporated under the political jurisdiction of the Federation of Space as of 2370. Well, that sounds nice. It does. It sounds lovely. You've incorporated people who don't even know you exist. I know. They have first contact and they have all sorts of rules, but think about this. When you become a warp-capable nation, warp-capable civilization, you are sitting there knowing you have just cracked an amazing piece of technology. And what arrives for first contact? Oh. A Galaxy class. Well, A, it's a single ship turning up, so it doesn't look that scary. But let's be honest, it's pretty big and impressive, and look at all the science it can do, and all the the space it has, and another commenter on 12-minute video said the cruise line, and they're the cruise liners of space. But that's part of the point because they're not just there for diplomacy with peers. They're there for turning up and impressing those nations, those pre-warp, just turning to warp civilizations, with the sheer power of Federation who surround you. But we're oh so friendly. We're a democracy. Do you want to join? You'll get all this technology if you join. If you don't, you won't. You'll get all this access to trade if you join. If you don't, you'll still get access to trade, but let's be honest, your technology will be nowhere near the level it is, a level of ours. It'll take you ages to reach an equivalent level, which will mean your industries, which would be at a permanent disadvantage. If you join, you get all this medical assistance. If you don't, we'll probably still give you aid and help you, but it won't be the same. Not in a nasty way, just in a reality. To quote another admiral other than Jean-Luc Picard when talking about the Romulans, we have to put our people first because they're our people. What do you do when faced with that? When faced with this shining, gorgeous looking ship, this wonderful lines, and overwhelming firepower that could wreck your entire planet in minutes if it wanted to. They're offering the hand of friendship. Do you take it? Do you join the Federation? By the 24th century, Starfleet's mandates stated that no warships or ships designed purely for defensive purposes would be built. Well, that's an interesting scenario to get into with the Federation, but it does also give you an interesting idea of the Galaxy class. As said, these ships are quickly converted into carriers, into heavy cruisers, battle cruisers, dreadnoughts, call them what you will. They can get a significant firepower upgrade, and what do? They take out the science stuff, plonk, and put in more war stuff. In many ways, Exploration Cruiser is the largest ship they are able to build. Exploration class. And if you build them a bit bigger, well, then perhaps you necessarily need, that gives you a basis for capital ships, which I'm fairly certain you're definitely not supposed to be having. Although it's again kind of interesting once you, after we consider certain battles and experience with the Borg, especially, Starfleet does start to reform their ideas a bit, which does help them in the Dominion War. It's an interesting thing to postulate. What would have happened to Starfleet if the Dominion War had happened before the Borg encounters? Would they have still had access to the new types of torpedo? Would they still have had access to Ships like the Defiant, would they be war emergency builds? Would they even have considered building them in the first place? Because you need to theoretically change your entire mindset to start producing warships, unless you're already producing them, but you're doing an HMS Unicorn, the not a carrier, honestly, Gov, of the Royal Navy from the interwar period. Which does give us a sort of interesting thing, because, as I've always said, to my mind, out of Gene Roddenberry's creations, the Federation is the United States and Starfleet is the US Navy gone to space. In many, many respects. When we start talking about the world of the Andromeda, and that's the series, which I've already done another video on, that's more the British Navy gone to space. That is very much Royal Navy, if you look at it, some of its stylings, which may or may not be a conscious effort on Gene. It might just be a scenario which comes from having one government which has a constitutional monarchy, one government which has has a presidency. That could well be where the sort of differences start to spring from, and that could be the interpretations of a modern navy through those. However, when we're considering Starfleet, we're considering a very powerful navy, a very strong navy, but also a navy which, on the face of it, is not equal to its task. Because if they don't have warships, how are they able to maintain that? You could say technological advantage, but seriously? There are the Cardassians, who are pretty much a military dictatorship. There is the Klingons, who are sufficiently motivated by love of war that you are not going to show them any weakness. And you have the Romulans, who, even before Commodore O and all the other stuff that they have got up to, are pretty much masters of manipulation and will take advantage of any situation they can to build themselves up. But you're not allowed warships. And the Federation is a dream that became a reality and spread throughout the stars. Or are we talking about a democracy which has a fleet that has a very good PR machine? The Galaxy class look so much not like a warship, but they have all these military capabilities built in as standard and can be quickly adapted to even more powerful warships. If we look through that fleet, you see that picture there from the Dominion War. There are a lot of very capable ships in that picture. There are 4, possibly as many as 6 Galaxy class sitting in that. They're in the Dominion War. There'll be entire wings of Galaxy class ships employed to fight battles. This is a class which theoretically the Federation only wanted. Well, they theoretically only built 13 of, and only 7 of those entered service, and 6 were put into reserve status, or rather, never completed. And it's only after Wolf 359 that they start to actually do more with construction for galaxies and actually bring them into service. But they bring so many so quickly into service. They don't stop with just the 6. They start to build a lot more. And they start to adapt them and evolve them. So Starfleet has the capability to expand the production of its very large, very powerful warships very quickly and arm them very quickly. And it's another thing when you start looking at the dates of how quickly they build ships when they want them. They have the ships there when they want them. They can build quickly when they need to. There is this whole thing of it takes a long time to develop the Galaxy class. Development begins in 2343. Apparently would become the longest design, development, and construction period of any class in Starfleet up to that point. Galaxy herself is launched in 2357. It's 14 years into the program. Enterprise D and Yamato would follow in 2363. We do know once they start building, they can build these ships relatively quickly. But I think part of the initial development period, and one of the reasons why it takes as long as it does in development, is because if we consider the Ford class, okay, they are possibly the most complicated ships that have been built to date. They are designed with a lot of open architecture. It's built into them every single level to allow rooms and spaces to be reconfigured as needed. You can basically turn whole spaces into different things in hours. You can take a room which is set up as a conference center, turn it into, take stuff out, turn it back in, turn it into things which is becomes a UAV control command and control center. You could do whatever you need, or intelligence briefing room, or whatever you need. It's one of the things that's advertised about them. It's one of the things that appears on quite a lot of literature about them. And that's inert spaces. If you're designing a spaceship which is going to be able to be rapidly converted from role of exploration cruiser to anything else you might need a vessel of that size to do, that's going to take a little while. And you're going to go slowly about it, especially if you're a service which is theoretically not supposed to build warships, because you're going to do it in a way that is deniable. What's more interesting also, of course, is that this suggests that the Galaxy class are capital ships rather than cruisers. But that isn't a mutually exclusive thing. That isn't a mutually exclusive setting. We would always associate a capital ship with being a battleship, if you're, especially if you're from America or Britain, or an aircraft carrier, something very high status. But if you consider for quite a lot of powers in the 1920s, 1930s, even before then, and even since then, their capital ship, their biggest ship, the thing that represents them mostly on the galactic, on the sort of the international stage, is a cruiser. When I was talking about Romania's cruiser Elizabeta the other day, a video on her. She is their capital ship. Yes, she's a cruiser, but she's a capital ship. And for a spacefaring civilization, well, a cruiser as a capital ship makes probably most sense, and could well be bigger than a battleship or something like that you would normally build, because of the space that we need for diplomacy and going around exploring. Because what's the ship you're going to send? If you send a battleship to turn up at people's doorsteps, they're going to think you're invading them. So it has to look cruiserish. It might well be a battleship compared to their own capabilities, especially if they're just recently warp capable. They might still have lasers, which trigger a yellow alert. But the fact is, you are dealing with a scenario where cruisers as a capital ship makes sense. That it's not a mutually exclusive terminology. So, Rod comparison, are they cruisers? Well, the various sources. We have Memory Alpha, Exploration Cruiser. It's one of the largest and most powerful Federation starship classes of its time. Again, that's usually used to say, well, they must be battleships in some sources and some describers. But if we would again go to the interwar years, compared to 99% of the rest of the ships in the world, County class cruisers, or any of the other 8-inch cruisers, were one of the largest and most powerful warships classes of its time. The vast majority of warships in the world, smaller. Yeah, there's a few bigger. Most are smaller. Memory Beta. Primarily intended to be a ship of exploration, but it is also extremely heavily armed. This class of vessels is one of the largest and most powerful ever constructed by Starfleet. Again, nothing there which precludes a cruiser, but does emphasize exploration. And again, we can go with the Aegis sail, frigate, exploration, cruiser. It's a cruising ship. Not in the modern party boat scenario, but in the old, we're going to cruise over that way and see what's going on scenario. Memory Gamma. Exploration Cruiser. Explorer is a classification of starship used by Starfleet. Explorers tend to be the most versatile of starships, well equipped for scientific, diplomatic, and combat missions. Wow. Scientific, diplomatic, and combat missions. We have an Aegis sail cruiser, everyone. Perhaps what we should call the Enterprise is a frigate. Or a Razé. But that would be a cut down ship of the line. It does actually get kind of interesting when you start going through Starfleet scenario, and you can sort of go, well, hang on, should we be calling using these as ships of the line as a designation? Are they if they're cruisers, right? But are they're first rate, second rate? What are they in terms of cruisers? And you almost come with the Galaxy classes. Okay, in their normal role, they probably fit in at some in the region of a third rate. Powerful enough to fight pretty much anyone they want to, run away from anyone they don't. That fits. But that's a ship of the line level, not a cruiser. But hang on, didn't the Royal Navy occasionally use Razes or cut down third rates for the cruising role? Yeah. Oh. Cruisers are oftentimes actually in history bigger than battleships. Why? Because a battleship has the tendency to have its strength in its density, so it can be smaller. It also needs more maneuverability, and basically a battleship is for fighting battles. A cruiser will tend to need to be faster. It will tend to be longer ranged, and it will tend to do a lot more diplomatic missions. So all of which require it to have more space. There are many reasons for a cruiser to be bigger than a battleship. And we consider the duties of a cruiser. They can be task grip, leadership, flagship roles, big presence ship, big stick diplomacy, state of ship, capable combat ship, scientific exploration. It's a cruiser. Galaxy class origins. As said, they began in 2343. Let's see what this Galaxy class starship can do. Jean-Luc Picard, 2364. So at that point, he's got one of the newest ships in the service. He will be its commander for its entire service. It's kind of cool. Kind of disturbing. It says a lot about the promotion levels of the Federation. And this also suggests that they actually have quite a large number of ships. And when I'm saying a large number of ships, I'm talking in the thousands. You can only really afford to have people in post for as long as Jean-Luc Picard is in post as captain, even if it is of your flagship. If you have a lot of other posts you can put people into. And if you're probably doing enforced retirements below the rank of captain. Again, something you have to think about in Starfleet. Why am I saying this? Because otherwise you're going to create a tremendous bottleneck in your promotions. You're going to create a tremendous bottleneck. And you're going to have people aging in all positions. You're not going to have anywhere to promote junior officers. They're going to come in, they're going to go, oh, well, we've only got a few ships, and yeah, the captain's in post for like 50 years. So the first officer's going to be in post for like 50 years, and then probably they'll become captain. Or they'll have died. In which case, we'll get someone who's never had any command experience having to become captain because, well, no one, all the people have been in post and senior ranks for 50 years, and then they have to go away. We'll leave that. It's good for storytelling. It's not necessarily good for other scenarios. Now, as it was, he's actually in command, as said, for roughly 8 years. But that's still a long, long time. 8 years? And then he goes off and is captain of the E-class Enterprise for a number of years. That's especially something when your ship is your fleet flagship. To quote Nakamura, that's Faisal Nakamura, for 500 years, every ship that has borne the name of Enterprise has become a legend. This one is no different. So, Galaxy class design. Well, this is a bog standard design. The standard design one. Roughly 642.51 meters in length, being 463.73 meters. That's fat. Height draft 195.26 meters. That's 4.5 million metric tons. They'll be in service a long, long time. No, that has active 2360s to 2370s, but in my experience, they're active a lot longer than that. I copied this out of the datapad. Service long, long after the 2370s. In fact, it would almost not make sense to have done a 20-year development cycle and then keep the class only in service for 20 years. So whilst I realise that it is canon to say they're active 2360 to 2360s and 2370 to 2370s, I do not see them going out of service that quickly. Because again, it's replacing them, and it's the sheer number you end up building. There's also the evolution. This is one of the designs shown in this series. This is the heavy cruiser refit upgrade of them. It's got a third nacelle added in. It's got all sorts of extra photons, more powerful phasers added on. You can really upgrade these ships. This is a good example of what can be done. Capable of warp 9.8 at extreme risk. Warp 9.6 can be maintained for some hours. And warp 6 was usually the average cruise velocity. It's kind of like we'd understand modern warships or any warships on the ocean these days. They have a top speed. If you are certain captains in charge of HMS Rodney, you can exceed that top speed, but you also have a cruising speed. That is your most economical progression and movement forward, and that makes sense. Armament between 12 and 14 phaser arrays, 2 torpedo launchers with 250 photon torpedoes and antimatter mines. Deflector shields. This is their standard fit as they start out. By the end of the Dominion War, they'll be packing far more firepower. They'll be packing far more than just photon torpedoes. They'll be packing quantum torpedoes. Literally, these ships will be a great basis for upgrading. And it's almost like you're building a future-proof ship when you're building an exploration cruiser. You're building something which has the space to be upgraded as you need it to. So let's consider the fates of the ships and what they get up to. USS Galaxy. Well, we know very little about this ship. We really don't. We know that she appears in Tears of the Prophets. We know that she was a prototype, had an NK registry prefix originally, much like the USS Excelsior was originally given. And we know she took part in the Dominion War, seeing extensive service in the First Battle of Shintoa in 2374, and took part in the Battle of Cardassia, where this is from because it's her being engaged by a Cardassian defense position satellite. She's also assigned to Starfleet Battlegroup Omega that's supposed to engage the Scimitar. Of course, though, the Scimitar is destroyed by Enterprise E, so... She was listed as still being active as of 2379, so probably one of the vessels which serves quite a long time. And, yeah, had a good career. Challenger. Well, I always thought this was an interesting name, but not an inauspicious name for a Galaxy-class vessel. Expected to end up under the command of Geordie LaForge. or at least it does in this particular scenario, where it is arresting the Delta Flyer, which has Chakotay and Harry Kim aboard. It has served in a lot of operations. You hear about the Challenger far more often than you see it. You hear about what it's going to do, and of course, it was also at one point supposed to be commanded by Captain Montgomery Scott, so it has a history of having engineers ending up in charge of it, which is quite a cool thing. Although there is a debate as to when Geordie LaForge does actually take over the Challenger. But that can be fine. All we do know about it is that she's definitely still in service in 2390s when we consider the Star Trek Online game. Because one of the years when she might be taken over by Geordie LaForge is 2397. One Challenger, even at some point in a book, ends up being the scene of a fight between Jean-Luc Picard and a Borg-simulated James T. Kirk. That's something I'd like to see brought to the big screen. Patrick Stewart fighting William Shatner dressed as a Borg. That'd be fun. USS Odyssey, well, that's a sort of different story. We don't really hear much about her until 2370, when she's assigned to a patrol mission along the Cardassian border. Arrives at Deep Space Nine when it's realized that Benjamin Sisko has been taken prisoner in the Gamma Quadrant. She goes to investigate the threat posed by the Jem'Hadar. Now, she goes with an escort provided by, and this is what I find really funny. This is the task group. Some Danu class runabouts. Now, yes, I know the Danu class are lovely, but that's not a task group. That's not even sloops. You've sent a cruiser in with a task group made up of a couple of cutters. Seriously, the carrier conversion of the Galaxy could not happen soon enough. At least then they'd have some decent escorts, their own fighters. But this is the point I get into when we start talking about these missions. You're sending in a solo cruiser for a mission. That's not really sensible. They've taken one of your captains prisoner. If you are sending through less than 2 capital ships, as in or big status cruisers, you're in trouble. You really are. You need to show up with presence. This is a small problem I have with Starfleet is that they have these assets, they don't use them properly. These are cruisers, yes, they're self-sufficient, they go off and they do the maneuvers on their own. But the example I would use is Tsingtao, okay? Tsingtao 1959, I've talked about these events before. The Royal Navy sends in HMS Birmingham, she goes with a sloop as backup. Sloop is not much better than the Danu class, a little bit better, but not much. The thing is, there are other cruisers moving in that direction already. There are other cruisers already moving. And they decided to scale it down to 1 cruiser in order to de-escalate versus the number of cruisers they knew to be in the harbour. They knew how much force they would likely face from their opponents. Now, you can argue that Considering the Jem'Hadar and they actually finished off the Odyssey with a suicide run, then bringing in more ships would expose more to that sort of level of threat. And there's always the argument of you go with what you have available. But this is the point where it would have been sensible to have had, I don't know, some Intrepid class ships. Preferably Defiant class, but they're not really available at this point. Definitely some Intrepid class ships, or something similar, to have gone in with the Galaxy class. I.e., your cruiser goes in with some light cruisers, the Arafusa Dido equivalents. USS Venture. Now, again, one of the things that's interesting to me is how many of the Galaxy class get blown up, but B, how many original Galaxy class actually survive. Venture led a task force under the command of Admiral Hapzer that reinforced Deep Space Nine when it was attacked by Klingons. It was sort of people go threatened by Klingons. No, they were actually firing at each other. There was an actual fight. And in 2374, Venture participated in Operation Return, which involved protecting the flank of the Defiant, and was one of the first starships to arrive at Deep Space Nine after Dominion retreat. She also took part in the invasion of the Chintoka system and did all sorts of other operations. Venture has a really, really interesting life. And I say this as I was very happy when Star Trek finally produced some things about ships other than the ships named Enterprise. As much as I love the Enterprise, and I do enjoy Enterprise, I like it when you have ships other than Enterprise. I was really hopeful for a Stargazer series. I would really like a Venture series because if any ship seems to get through almost as much trouble, if not more, than Enterprise, but just do it in a less noticeable way, Venture seems to wander around doing all sorts of random things. She always seems to be there when she's needed. Not sure why, but Venture's always there when she's needed. Going, hello, I'm a Galaxy Class 2, but no one remembers me. Yamato. Okay, so the usual point about this one is why are they naming a ship Yamato? Well, A, it's a fairly nice, prestigious name in human culture, and I'm presuming the Galaxy class are quite big, but also there is going to be one called Abraham Lincoln. This is another reason why I think they have why I think you have to realize that I think the Galaxy class was intended to be bigger than 13 when they were originally ordering it, and I think they chose names to fit the yard that was building the first batch. B, don't take this the wrong way, but I think they have to have a lot more ships out there because it's amazing how many ships seem to have human names. And you would think with 150 homeworlds plus in the Federation, they would have some names which might sound completely weird to our ears. Unless this is, of course, the Federation is the human empire by a different name. Admittedly, most of the Starfleet personnel, the vast majority of everyone we see in these television programs, especially fighting the fights and being a core part of Starfleet, do seem to be rather human. Not that I'm saying anything. Now, both Enterprise and Yamato were established at the Utopia Planasia Fleet Yards. And, well, She was commanded by Captain Richard Mackenzie and was patrolling neutral zone when she gets a virus. At this point, she also, well, prior to that, she'd actually changed to Donald Varley being in charge. She gets an Iconian software transmission, an Iconian virus. And again, this is an interesting thing because Enterprise comes to try and assist her, which is nice. Wow, there's a ship within close enough distance to try and come and assist you. Which is nice. And kind of rare. Kind of rare. Now, admittedly, there's a Romulan warbird cloaked cruiser not that far away, causing its own trouble. But leaving that to one side, Yamato is the first Galaxy class we see blow up on screen. And she does it rather spectacularly. Secondary hull goes. Again, the weakness of the Galaxy class does seem to be that secondary hull. The fact that they are, you can say this is part of their whole idea of being able to do solar explorations, save money so that we don't have to have two ships go, because that would make things a lot safer and be a lot more sensible. Oh yeah, the ship divides into two. Cute. Ship divides into two. One section, appropriate being a flying saucer. Enterprise. Well, Enterprise D is the 5th Federation starship to bear the name Enterprise. So, traditionally, ships named Enterprise are the flagship of Starfleet, which makes sense for an incredibly cruiser-orientated force, which as any Starfleet is going to be. If you think about it, you are going to need ships which pretty much can turn up and be self-sufficient. They're not able to go, you are not, as a run-of-the-mill, unless you're in a massive war, producing specialist ships is going to be very problematic. But producing large explorer ships, which can be adapted, is very sensible. Explorer ships are going to be cruisers. So they're going to be adaptable versions of a cruiser hull. She does many missions, including a sort of 8 years under Picard before getting lost. Takes part in all sorts of first contact missions, all sorts of diplomatic missions. Is often used as a core capability of task groups. Fits in as and when needed. Is equally happy operating her own or as part of a group. Yeah. She's a cruiser. You don't send battleships off to do first contact. It's too expensive. And it's too risky. You wouldn't do it. But a Galaxy-class Explorer cruiser. That's what she's going off to do. There are some limitations, I would say, to design for this. And for example, an average day aboard ship included 4 birthdays, 2 personnel transfers, 2 chess tournaments, a secondary school play, 4 promotions, and at least 1 birth. That's a lot. Even when you think of the number of crew which a Galaxy-class vessel can have, we go back to this lovely stat sheet. Crew, 1,000 to 6,000, normal complement depending on assignment. up to 15,000 people in maximum capacity. That's a lot. Also, don't take this the wrong way, but I think you're light on the birthdays. Sorry, Commander Ada, I think you missed some. So now we get into the most interesting discussion of the Galaxy class, because this is the one which usually comes down to the point of people going, well, no, you see, they must be the battleships of Starfleet because they produce so few. No, there also could be the explorer ships because they produce so few. In fact, that would almost make more sense because you're probably going to need more capital ships than you need explorer ships. And once they start being used as capital ships and filling in that role, well, that's when it becomes sensible for them to be produced in far larger numbers. This is the point I would like to make about the Galaxy class. When they are literally an explorer cruiser, you can probably get away with 13. I would argue quite heavily that you need more than 13. I would argue that they would have ostensibly should have been planning 15 to 16, but I can see why they might have ended up being cutting them short at 13. But, well, 13 hulls were built originally and 7 were commissioned, but in our memory, we only have 6 names. Potentially Magellan is the 7th of the commissioned ones. The other potential commissioned one is the Abraham Lincoln, but that's the debate between Memory Gamma and Memory Beta. The ones which are probably the original build are the ones I've got in the box. I would get, from the data and information I can find, those are the ones I think are the original build. And that comes from the Memory Gamma list. Three of those are converted to Galaxy carriers. There is a whole debate of the galaxies being evolved. Some become, as mentioned before, they get their science, all their science stuff removed, and they are turned into dreadnoughts, or maybe a battle cruiser, depending on your perspective. Some have some of the science removed, but also retain some of the get expanded command facilities and expanded weapons and become a heavy cruiser. Some have a sort of weird hybrid of all the different variations put in them. Some are left exploring role. When you're just using these ships for exploration and you've built this whole type and you've got it ready to go, and you're just needing to do exploration, you need less than when they become capital ships, as in for fighting wars. When they become the genesis of your large ship program, and that's what they really do become. They become, in certain roles, these are our exploration cruisers in that configuration. However, we take that same hull, we put it through this variation, it becomes our carrier. We put in this carrier configuration, it becomes our this and that. And that's the one good thing you have of having a large cruiser hull. You can adapt it, especially in spaceship terms. Wall 359 happens. You're going to start building more galaxies. Dominion War happens. What do? Do you go, hang on, I'm at war, so now I'm going to spend 20 years developing a new class of ship? Or am I going to keep churning out what I already have in service? And what I'm already constructing? Well, it's tempting. It really is tempting, if you're the Federation properly, to do the latter, because they are naturally inclined that direction. But, thankfully, I'm not sure which particular person hit their design bureaus and their politicians around the head. Could well have been Benjamin Sisko, could have been Jean-Luc Picard, could have been Well, if she was in the right place, certainly would have been Catherine Janeway. Let's be honest. If anyone's likely to start beating up politicians, it's more likely to be Janeway. Possibly using politicians to beat up other politicians by physically lifting them up and chucking them around. But leaving that to one side, someone manages to persuade them to keep doing this simple thing and just build Galaxy class. And this is where we end up with Abraham Lincoln. Now, I realize that's actually probably not Abraham Lincoln. That's just a generic galaxy being used to illustrate Abraham Lincoln. But I needed a good galaxy picture to illustrate Abraham Lincoln, and that's what I went with. Now, Abraham Lincoln is an interesting iteration. In fact, honestly, possibly my favorite, because it seems the most sensible. Now, I think Abraham Lincoln is definitely one of the first 13, and the reason I say this is because, well, she's listed according to Gamma as being part of the first production in the series of Galaxy class. She's launched under the command of Captain J.P. Hansen in 2360. Which I'm not really certain about, because don't take this the wrong way. But that would put her in service. Technically, before Enterprise. So I don't think that happened. Sorry, just checking my phone's on silent again. So I put that service entry date back a bit myself. I'd say she might have been launched earlier, but I don't think she was commissioned before 2363. Now, in 2362, we know her captain, the person who's assigned to her, Hanson, is apparently promoted to Rear Admiral. And is replaced by the officer who had previously been first officer on the Carl Brennan. Again, this is why I say it's the US Navy in space. You're naming, and the other ships are all being named after people. Anyway, leaving that to one side, we do know that she takes part in the Battle of Ultima Thule in 2366 during the War of the Cardassian Fourth Order, which is kind of weird if she's not the seventh one, but it could be Magellan. In which case, what's Abraham Lincoln doing? Now, Abraham Lincoln officially becomes a carrier when she's converted in 2372. 2372. That's an interesting year. What happens in 2373? Well, and let's see, in 2073, the Dominion War begins. And that's when they apparently need carriers, and they need them quickly. There's also the Sovereign class Enterprise E is launched in 2372. 23 and Hiroku Sulu apparently died from natural causes, the legendary Starfleet captain in 2372. So there's a lot going on in 2372, and a lot going on in 2371 and all that sort of period. So here's my theory about the Abraham Lincoln. I think it's kind of interesting that the 6 galaxies are apparently built up to a level that they can be quickly they are not completed, but they are stored in their components elsewhere. I wouldn't be surprised if one of them could be completed in a configuration which would make easy change to an aircraft carrier, or rather a carrier. Now, the battle that Abraham Lincoln, of course, takes part in against the Cardassian Fourth Order, the Battle of Ultima Thule, well, some of the accounts I read that involve a rather large number of shuttlecraft, etc., and other ships being involved in a very similar to a fighter role. Then, after the experience apparently from the Marquise, they decide that they are going to suddenly create Peregrine-class fighters, and they are going to convert 3 Galaxy ships, when they apparently don't have that many in service, Lincoln, Citadel, and Eldorado, experimentally into carriers. Main shuttle bay in the source section is expanded forwards and outwards. Additional industrial replicators for fabrication of fighter parts are installed. Crew accommodations are also increased, requiring removal of the civilian-orientated accoutrements, i.e., nursery, schoolrooms. But that doesn't matter because, honestly, by this point, Starfleet's finally realized that actually having whole officers' families aboard frontline vessels is not a sensible idea. And one of the holodecks even has to be removed. Enlisted quarters are converted to 4 crewman rooms. Straight out of lower decks. Refit is completed early 2373. And she takes part in fights against the Klingons, with the forces at Ajan Prime, and then, of course, is assigned to the Second Fleet in the Dominion War. And takes part in pretty much every single major engagement of that war. Wow. You quickly adapted one of your largest cruisers experimentally to a carrier. Oh, and by the way, this ship may or may not have been officially completed as a normal Galaxy class in the first place. Oh, and it gets even more fun once you start looking at that. You consider the history of those 3 vessels converted to carriers. Because if we look at them, we see that Abraham Lincoln and Citadel are both part of the original group. And Eldorado is one beyond a number in history, and is also sort of fits in terms of timeline of production with actually almost the original group, which fits my idea that there might have actually been more than 13. That it's very difficult for people to tell how many hulls and how many components of hulls are being made. Once you stop, you're not actually assembling them as a completed hull. Oh, we're building spare parts. And it's after this period, of course, that the Federation does the whole componentization, which means they can rip things in and out of different starships and put them in for the roles needed. It's better for their combat survivability and for their maintaining their force structure to basically Shermanize their fleet. Amazing. So what am I saying? Am I saying that the Peregrine fighter, as gorgeous as it is, was preordained from a while before? Am I saying that Starfleet is a cruiser-orientated navy that has variations in the size of cruisers and has plans sitting there ready to go to adapt its largest cruisers into the roles of the various ships it needs above a large cruiser when it needs wartime, and designs in that capability in mind, but doesn't maintain that capability in normal times because it wants to look more peaceful? Because It doesn't want to look like it's a guard dog keeping the various members inside the Federation, despite the arrival of such a large ship being a key component in attracting new to warp civilizations to join the Federation. That's for you to think about. Summary, though, is it gets very interesting whenever you start to look into these ships. The Galaxy class are a very successful, very large version in many ways of the LCS concept that has caused so much trouble today. Or the Danish ship construction, their frigate designs, the Iver Hudsfeldts and the Avson class. They're designed to be able to plug and play with a lot of technology, and they're designed to be a very adaptable hulls. Honestly, if I was myself building them, building 13 hulls doesn't make sense if I'm going to be storing them. Building maybe a few more hulls, maybe make it 16, and 3 of them already being rolled as carriers, or rather to be able to be adapted to carriers, would make sense once I'd completed them. Again, while they're incomplete, no one knows. And the thing is, yes, you have Section 31, but Section 31 is an extreme example of what I would call sensible paranoia. We go back to this. Starfleet is surrounded. The Federation is surrounded. Yes, the Klingon Federation alliance is a critical alliance for the Federation for peace in the Alpha Quadrant. It's critical, and as a part of it, the Klingons have to feel like they're the most military powerful, which means Starfleet has to look less powerful in some respects. Fitting for, not with. Building for, not with. That starts to make sense under those circumstances, as long as you can quickly adapt the ships. And you can quickly put together the ships. Fighters, they are a very sensible force multiplier for Starfleet. You could say they're a sensible force multiplier after Wolf 359. You could go they're even more sensible multiplier after the Odyssey incident. Let's be honest. If I had been putting that force together, and I'd had the Abraham Lincoln worked up and ready to go as a carrier, I would have had Odyssey, I would have had Abraham Lincoln, I'd have tried to have 3 or 4 Intrepid class or equivalent vessels there, and I'd have had some Daniel class runabouts. I'd have gone in with a task group, because I don't know what kind of threat I'm facing. And the thing is, with a carrier which looks like another Galaxy class cruiser, no one knows what's going to pop out of it until the fighting starts. It just looks like another Galaxy class. So it looks like I've sent 2 large cruisers and 4 small cruisers to go and say hi. You don't see the difference till you get close. And I make sure you don't see the difference till you get close. But that might be me. That might be me being paranoid? Would you say, Fluff? Overly aggressive? Distrusting. or thinking, I know, presuming to carry out diplomacy with openness is always a good idea, but the whole point is you're supposed to stop being so open the moment the other side shows you can't trust them. I would say taking one of your captains a prisoner shows you can't trust them. This is the other point as well. The other side of the coin. The Defiant class, when they're put together, they have significant components added in from the Galaxy class. But basically, it's a stripped down weapon ship. It is a tribal battle daring class destroyer equivalent for the Federation. It's something they need to be able to deploy in swarms, flotillas of. Again, if we consider the experience the Royal Navy pursued, when they needed to give the Turks a good reason not to get involved in World War II, Warspite, 4 tribal class destroyers, went for a visit. That's when you sent in the battleship. But Cunningham did consider turning up with a cruiser. The reason he didn't pick the cruiser, he picked the battleship, and this was the interesting thing from him, was he basically said, well, the Turks don't have commerce and trade. So for them, the battleship, the guns, and the idea of what it might do to their forts, that's what will make them think. He doesn't write in those words. Not those exact words. But you can paraphrase what he's putting forward as his reasoning. The power of my flagship seemed the most sensible accoutrement to take. But the question is, why does the Starfleet not already have ships like this? And the thing is, they actually do. Just take a Defiant, all the components in a Defiant hull, and add in some science decks. And you have the vast majority of what the Federation has probably patrolling their space and doing their presence mission and doing. Well, I think they're probably a level above the Ceretrus, but not far off it. Capable ships. Very capable of acting en masse. Alright, naval history. We've got coming. Well, today, of course, was the Galaxy class. And if you've watched this far, I want you to answer me 2 questions. One, would you like the Galaxy class to be a live on Sunday? That's this Sunday, the 22nd of May, 2022. And if you want a live discussion for it, I'm more than happy to do a live discussion, explain points and answer questions live. And secondly, what do you think? Do you think that Starfleet is necessarily honest with everyone and is going, yes, we're only building 13 ships, or consider, or is it 13? Is it 13 in original configuration, 3 in carrier configuration, and yeah, that's our force we're building. Oh, and by the way, yes, we'll 7 of them will enter service, but 9 will be sitting in components. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe they'll be completed at out of the way stations. Because again, Starfleet has these three big core yards, but they have a lot more yards than just those three. A lot more yards than just those three. So what do you think? Oh, I should announce the patron winner, shouldn't I? I will do. Down we go, Doom. Oh, yeah. Running a little late for class. But it's a drop-in class, so I'm not too worried. I don't think anyone's there yet. No, no one's there yet. Right, who won the patron? Who won the patron? Let's see. Oh, we got 90 active patrons. That's nice. Let's see. Posts published. And the winners of the vote for patron topics are Schnitzel. You've done it to me again. You lovely people. You have managed to get a freeway tie for first place. Schnitzel. Frigging Schnitzel. Bolton, W. Bolton, Torpedo Development, 1939, its impact on destroyer design doctrine, 12 votes. Vision, History of Survey Ships in the Royal Navy, 12 votes. And Wayne Boring's Comparison of Strategic Economic Infrastructure Concern Driving Designs of Warships of Current Future, Royal Navy, Royal Australian Navy, Royal Canadian, and Royal New Zealand Navy ships. All 12 votes. Glyn Stewart, Cruisers and Cruiser Actions of the Spanish-American War, came next with 9 votes. Then was 8. No one got less than 6 votes. You think of all those questions I put up. So I'm going to have to play around with the various ones of these, but I will source it out, and you will be getting those 3 topics. One will probably have to come out on a Sunday. Take care, everyone. Hope you enjoyed, and hope you found it interesting. And as said, if you want 22nd to be about the Galaxy class and Federation, please just comment below and say. Take care.